Agatha Raisin and the Secret Kept Behind the Bookshelf. Dear listeners, welcome to tonight's mystery. I'm Sam, your host, and I'm delighted to have you join me for another captivating tale. Before we begin, I'd love to know, where are you tuning in from tonight? Are you relaxing at home, on the go, or somewhere a bit unexpected? Share your answer in the comments. I always enjoy hearing from our wonderful community. And do not forget to like and subscribe me for more mysteries every day. Now let's get cozy and dive into tonight's story. Chapter 1, The Quiet Cottage That Wasn't. Agatha Raisin had planned a perfectly quiet evening, the sort she rarely allowed herself. The cottage was warm, the kettle had just begun its gentle simmer, and the fading light outside wrapped the village in a soft lavender glow. She had settled into her favorite armchair with the intention of doing absolutely nothing of consequence. For once, the world felt unbothered, and Agatha intended to enjoy every peaceful moment of it. That peace lasted precisely 3 minutes. A hesitant knock broke through the stillness, so soft that Agatha nearly convinced herself it had come from the wind edging her windows. But then it sounded again, a cautious tap that carried an unmistakable human uncertainty. With a small sigh, Agatha rose and crossed the living room, wondering which villager had arrived with which trivial concern. She swung open the door to find Miss Tilly Cobb standing on her step, looking as anxious as a mouse in a cat's parlor. Tilly, the village's shy librarian, clutched a small parcel wrapped in brown paper. Dust clung to its corners, and the twine around it looked as though it had been tied decades ago. "I'm terribly sorry to disturb you, Miss Raisin," she whispered, pushing her round spectacles up her nose. "But this was found behind one of the old bookshelves this afternoon. It was wedged so tightly we had to shift the shelf to get it out." Agatha glanced at the parcel, then back at Tilly. "And why bring it to me?" "Well," Tilly said, extending the package with trembling hands, "it's addressed to you, or at least to someone with the same initials." Agatha saw the handwriting. Elegant loops, spelling A.R. Someone had taken care crafting those letters. Someone who wanted the parcel to be noticed, eventually. Agatha stepped aside, allowing Tilly into the cottage. The librarian paused in the doorway, brushing off her shoes before entering, as though afraid of disturbing Agatha's tidy home. The cottage glowed with lamplight, casting warm shadows along the walls and softening the edges of the evening. Tilly looked around with cautious admiration, as though stepping into a place that might vanish if she breathed too loudly. Agatha placed the parcel on the small table near the fireplace. As she leaned closer, she caught a faint, musty scent rising from it, an odor reminiscent of old trunks left untouched in forgotten attics. She brushed her fingers along the wrapping, noticing how the dust smeared beneath her touch. "You didn't open it?" Agatha asked. "Oh, heavens, no," Tilly said, shaking her head vigorously. "I thought it best to bring it straight to you. Besides, it made a little sound when we moved it. I didn't want to disturb anything inside." Agatha tilted her head. "A sound?" "Yes, a rattle of some sort. Very soft, but definitely there." The cottage hummed with a quiet that felt heavier now, as though the parcel had brought a new weight into the room. The kettle whistled gently, and Agatha turned it off, though her attention remained glued to the dusty package. Tilly shifted her weight, wringing her hands. "I hope it's nothing unpleasant," Tilly murmured. Agatha offered a faint smile, her curiosity beginning to spark. "Most things that arrive addressed to me tend to be a bit unpleasant, or at least inconvenient. But this," she tapped the edge of the box, "this seems different." A soft crackle from the fireplace punctuated her words, as though the room itself was leaning in, waiting. The evening no longer felt quiet. It felt expectant. And Agatha, despite herself, felt the same. She drew a steady breath, sensing the night slipping away. Whatever lay inside that parcel had crossed years to reach her door, and it would not wait longer. Agatha fetched a small pair of scissors from the drawer and returned to the table, studying the parcel as though it might shift on its own. The brown paper looked brittle, the twine stiff enough to snap at a careless tug. She worked slowly, easing the blades beneath the knot until it loosened with a soft sigh. As the paper unfolded, a faint cloud of dust rose, drifting through the warm glow of the room.
Inside lay a square of linen, carefully folded, its edges yellowed with age. Agatha lifted it with both hands, surprised by the unexpected weight resting within its center. She unwrapped the linen to reveal a brass key, far larger than she'd imagined. Ornate carvings spiraled along its stem, forming patterns she couldn't immediately place. They resembled vines, perhaps, or winding rivers, or symbols from a book she once skimmed but had never managed to finish. Whatever the shapes meant, the craftsmanship was unmistakably deliberate. Beneath the key sat a small slip of paper, folded into a neat rectangle. Agatha opened it with a finger, half expecting a warning or some fussy library scolding. Instead, she found 5 words: "Do not trust the quiet shelves." At first she laughed. The message seemed dramatic, even theatrical, the sort of line an overzealous mystery enthusiast might scribble after reading one too many thrillers. But as she looked again, the amusement faded. Something about the sharp slant of the handwriting unsettled her. It didn't feel like a joke. The key rested heavily in her palm, cold despite the warmth of the room. She traced a thumb over the carved symbols, noticing how the grooves caught the light like tiny pathways leading somewhere she hadn't yet discovered. A thought crept into her mind, subtle but insistent. This key had waited a long time. The fireplace crackled abruptly, louder than before, as though reacting to her discovery. Agatha jerked her head up, expecting to see a log collapsing or sparks leaping, but the flames looked perfectly steady. The cottage, once serene, now held a strange tension. Shadows thickened in the corners, not ominous, but alert. It felt as if the room itself leaned closer, paying attention. Agatha placed the key gently on the table and sat back, trying to shake off the odd sensation. She loved her cottage, with all its quirks and creaks, yet tonight it felt aware in a way she couldn't quite explain. She picked up the key again, weighing it carefully. The carvings deepened near the bow, forming a symbol she didn't recognize, almost like an incomplete crest. She pressed her lips together, thinking, someone meant for her to receive this, someone whose identity stretched backward into the long corridors of library history. "Do not trust the quiet shelves," she murmured under her breath, imagining rows of books listening, the musty air shifting with secrets. The phrase bothered her more than she wished to admit, not because of danger, but because of possibility. The library had always felt safe, perhaps too safe. Agatha folded the note and tucked it into a small drawer beside the table. She wrapped the brass key in a clean handkerchief and slipped it into her coat pocket for the morning. The decision formed naturally, fitting itself into her mind with ease. She would go to the library at first light and see for herself what lay behind those quiet shelves. The night settled once more around her cottage, but its calm no longer lulled her. A puzzle had arrived at her doorstep, and despite the strangeness of it, she felt the familiar stir of curiosity warming her more than the fire ever could. Chapter 2. Shelves of Dust and Secrets. Agatha arrived at the Carsley Library just after opening, when the morning light was still pale, and the village remained hushed under the remnants of dawn. The building usually greeted her with a welcoming brightness, full of dust motes drifting lazily through sunbeams, and the familiar scent of old pages warming in the light. Today, however, something felt off the moment she stepped inside. A cool draft brushed past her legs, carrying the faint smell of paper that had slept too long in the dark. The interior seemed dimmer than usual, as though the windows allowed in only reluctant light. Tilly was waiting near the front desk, wringing her hands as though she'd been doing it for several minutes already. Her spectacles slipped down her nose the moment she spotted Agatha, and she pushed them up with a nervous swipe. "Thank you for coming," she whispered, her voice softer than the turning of a page. "I didn't sleep at all. The parcel kept running through my mind." Agatha gave a calm nod. "Let's have a look, then. Lead the way." Together they walked deeper into the library. The usual gentle creaks of the wooden floors sounded sharper, echoing faintly in the chilly air. The rows of books stood in orderly silence, Yet something about that silence felt deliberate, as though every spine was holding its breath. Tilly's steps were quick, but hesitant, her gaze flicking toward the back of the room more than necessary. They reached the far wall, where a towering bookshelf loomed over the carpet like an old sentry. It was larger than the others, solid oak, darker, heavier, the kind of furniture that seemed built for secrets. Agatha immediately noticed the faint scrape marks along the floorboards beneath it, thin arcs, barely visible unless one looked closely, curved out from the base and formed overlapping trails. She crouched down, brushing her fingertips against the grooves. "When did you discover these?" she asked. Tilly knelt beside her, smoothing her skirt nervously. "Earlier this week. I thought perhaps someone had nudged the shelf while dusting, but no one admits to touching it, and it's far too heavy to shift accidentally." Agatha rose and placed both hands against the side of the bookshelf. The oak felt cold beneath her palms. With a steady push, she applied pressure. To her surprise, the massive structure shifted slightly, only an inch or two, but enough to confirm the truth. "It moves," she murmured, narrowing her eyes. "Not easily, but it does." Tilly swallowed hard. "I knew it," she whispered, her voice tremulous. "Something's been off about it. It creaks at odd hours, and sometimes I hear, well, it probably sounds foolish." "Nothing you say will sound foolish," Agatha replied, stepping closer to the librarian. "Tell me." Tilly pressed her hand to her chest to steady herself. "Whispers," she said finally. "I've heard them when I stay late. Not from people, not from anywhere I can see. Just soft murmuring right here, by the shelf. It stops whenever I get near. I mentioned it to the others, but they laughed, said I'd been reading too many ghost stories." Agatha studied her carefully. Tilly's face was pale, but her eyes held an earnest fear, not the exaggerated kind born from imagination, but the fragile kind born from repeated, unexplainable experiences. Agatha turned back to the shelf, running her fingers along its edge. The wood bore scratches, tiny indentations that didn't match casual wear. Something had pressed or pulled at it recently. The air felt oddly still around them, as though the library itself were watching. Agatha placed her hand once more on the side of the shelf, leaning enough to create another subtle shift. The movement was quiet, but undeniable. "You're right," she said softly. "This shelf isn't as still as it appears." Tilly let out a shuddering breath, equal parts relieved and unnerved. Agatha stepped back, her curiosity now fully awake. The morning might have begun in silence, but the library held far more than quiet stories. Something here wanted to be found.
Agatha knelt before the lowest shelf, her fingers brushing the faint outline of a small metal plate she hadn't noticed earlier. The brass key felt cool against her palm as she aligned it with the hidden keyhole, surprised at how neatly it slid into place. Tilly hovered behind her, wringing her hands in tight, nervous loops. When the lock gave a soft, decisive click, both women froze. The sound was delicate, almost polite, yet it carried a strange finality that unsettled the quiet library. Agatha tested the shelf with a tentative push, expecting resistance from the heavy wood. Instead, it yielded instantly, swinging outward with surprising elegance, as though waiting for this precise moment. A gust of stale, ancient air spilled into the library, carrying with it the scent of forgotten paper and something darker beneath. Tilly squeaked and stumbled back, pressing her hand to her chest. Agatha steadied the flashlight, angling its beam into the narrow gloom where dust drifted like slow-moving fog. The passage revealed behind the shelf was scarcely wider than Agatha's shoulders. Its walls, once white, had yellowed into the shade of old parchment. Papers littered the floor in irregular clusters, some curled from age, others flattened as though stepped on long ago. Agatha's light skimmed over a fallen wooden sign, its faded lettering spelling "Archive Closed," with a stern authority now undercut by years of neglect. Tilly hovered at the threshold, unwilling to enter but equally unwilling to leave Agatha alone. "It looks dangerous," Tilly whispered, though her voice was swallowed by the close walls. Agatha stepped forward,
the floorboards beneath her boots creaking in long unheard protest. She felt a draft brush past her cheek, cool and deliberate, as though something within the passage exhaled in greeting. She paused, scanning the narrow space for vents or cracks, but the walls were sealed tight. The sensation lingered, urging her onward with a peculiar mix of caution and curiosity she knew too well. Tilly's voice trembled again. "Maybe we should fetch Mr. Cummings-Brown, or the vicar, someone official." But Agatha merely lifted a hand, steady and calm. The passage had awakened something in her, a familiar spark that always lit when a mystery leaned close. She took another careful step, her flashlight revealing more scattered documents, their edges nibbled by time. The air grew cooler, but not unpleasantly so. It felt like entering a quiet room where someone had just been thinking deeply. Agatha crouched to inspect a cluster of papers gathered near the wall, noticing faint ink strokes that resembled catalog markings. Most lines were smudged beyond recognition, but a few characters remained crisp, as though written yesterday. She brushed away a layer of dust and felt the floor shift slightly beneath her, almost an imperceptible tremor. Tilly gasped, convinced the passage might collapse. Yet the walls stood firm. The tremor had intrigued Agatha by its timing. It was subtle, synchronized with her touch, as if the archive responded to her presence rather than the other way around. She rose slowly, lifting the flashlight toward the corridor's end where darkness folded into itself like a curtain pulled too tightly. The beam revealed nothing more than dust motes drifting lazily, yet Agatha felt an undeniable pull, a gentle insistence that whatever waited deeper inside had a story eager to be heard. Tilly remained at the entrance, whispering Agatha's name with growing desperation, but Agatha barely registered it. The cool air wrapped around her shoulders like an invitation. With a steady breath and an even steadier resolve, she stepped farther in, letting the narrow silence of the archive close behind her like a soft, secretive door. Somewhere ahead, a faint rustle hinted that she was no longer the passage's only curious visitor there now.
Chapter 3. The Dusty Passage of Forgotten Things. Agatha moved deeper into the passage, her footsteps muffled by the thick layer of dust carpeting the floor. The narrow walls seemed to absorb every sound except the faint crackle of old paper shifting beneath her boots. She swept her flashlight in a slow arc, revealing stacks of abandoned catalogs slumped against the walls like forgotten soldiers. Their covers were warped from age, their titles faded into soft smudges. Some pages fluttered when she passed, stirred by the faint breeze that seemed to follow her rather than precede her. A toppled wooden chair lay on its side farther in, its legs splintered as though it had fallen abruptly rather than through slow decay. Agatha crouched beside it, brushing dust from the seat. The disturbance around it was unusual. Dust swirled away less evenly here, leaving irregular trails as if someone had stepped around the chair recently. She narrowed her eyes, lifting the flashlight to inspect the floor more closely. There, imprinted in the pale dust, was a faint set of footprints. Not old ones, softened by time, but crisp, defined impressions. Someone had walked this passage not long ago. The size suggested an adult, though the spacing was oddly uneven, as if the person moved cautiously or hesitantly. Agatha traced the path with her light. The footprints continued deeper, weaving slightly, before heading straight toward a metal door at the end of the passage. The door stood out sharply against the aged walls, dark steel, rectangular, and utterly wrong for a cozy village library. A single narrow slot sat where a lock should be, though the mechanism looked unfamiliar. She tried the brass key out of instinct, but it barely entered the opening before hitting resistance. She withdrew it, frowning as she studied the frame. The hinges were clean, strangely free of rust, suggesting the door was maintained or used despite the abandoned state of the passage. She reached out and pressed her hand against the cool metal. It didn't budge. For a moment, she felt a vibration beneath her palm, faint as a heartbeat. She held her breath, listening. The passage remained still. Then, from behind her, there came a soft crunch, like a footstep placed carefully on loose paper. Agatha spun around, flashlight aimed directly at the sound. Her breath caught in her throat. The beam illuminated nothing but drifting dust, swirling in slow, hypnotic patterns. The corridor behind her was empty, all the way to the open bookshelf. No movement, no figure. Yet she had heard it. Close. Too close to be imagination. "Tilly?" Agatha called, her voice steady but edged with alertness. Tilly appeared at the entrance, her silhouette framed by the warm glow of the library behind her. She clutched the side of the shelf, eyes wide. "Agatha, I thought I heard someone speaking down there. A man's voice. Or maybe two." Her whisper trembled as it reached the narrow passage. Agatha scanned the dim length of the corridor again, but there was no sign of anyone else. No shifting shadows, no lingering presence she could detect. And yet, the air felt subtly different now, heavier with the sense of something unseen but aware. "Voices?" Agatha asked quietly, stepping back toward Tilly. Tilly shook her head quickly. I couldn't make out the words. They echoed. Strange, like coming through water." Agatha's gaze drifted once more to the metal door. Fresh footprints. A locked room. Footsteps with no owner. Voices that didn't belong to the two of them. Someone had been here, and someone might still be. She took one last look into the dusty quiet before turning to Tilly. "We're not alone in this place," she murmured, more to herself than anyone else. The passage, suddenly colder than before, seemed to agree.
Agatha stepped back toward the metal door, unable to shake the pull it seemed to exert on her attention. She raised her flashlight, letting the beam glide across its surface. At first, the steel looked smooth and purposefully plain, but as she adjusted the angle, faint markings caught the light. Thin, shallow engravings etched into the upper corner. She leaned closer. The letters were small, just barely visible beneath years of dust. "Archive B. Restricted," she read aloud. Tilly gasped softly behind her. "Restricted? But we've never had restricted archives here. At least, none that anyone told me about." Agatha ran her gloved fingertips over the words. They felt deliberate, official, and entirely out of place in the humble village library. She crouched to study the base of the door, and her attention snagged on something odd. A tiny fragment of paper wedged beneath the metal frame. It fluttered slightly, as if stirred by a draft that wasn't there. Carefully, she pinched the scrap and tugged it free. The paper tore at the edge, leaving an even smaller sliver still trapped under the door. Agatha lifted the piece to the beam of her flashlight. Only half a sentence remained legible, its ink smudged but still decipherable. "Must hide the ledger before she—" The fragment ended there, leaving the rest swallowed by time, or perhaps by whatever lay on the other side of the locked room. Agatha felt a spark of intrigue flare in her chest. A ledger. Something so important someone risked hiding it in a restricted archive. Someone else, perhaps, had tried to reach it. She slipped the scrap into her coat pocket with practiced subtlety. Before she could examine the door again, the corridor lights above them flickered. Once, twice. The pale glow trembled like a candle caught in a draft. Tilly yelped and clutched Agatha's sleeve. "Agatha, there's no switch for these lights," she whispered. "They're not supposed to turn off unless someone at the front desk does it." Agatha looked up. The bulbs hummed faintly, then dimmed to a level that left more shadow than light around them. The corridor's temperature dropped at the same time, settling into a biting cold that prickled at Agatha's cheeks. Her breath nearly showed in the air. "Perhaps the wiring's ancient," Agatha said, though she didn't sound convinced. "Carsley's library is old, but not so old that electricity behaved like something with a mind of its own." Tilly's voice shook. "We should go, please. This place, it doesn't want us here." Agatha hesitated, still studying the sharp outline of the door. The lock, the hidden keyhole, the footprints, the torn paper, it all pointed towards something concealed behind that steel barrier. She longed for a way to open it, to push deeper into the mystery and uncover the truth the library quietly guarded. But the lights flickered again, plunging the passage momentarily into near darkness. Tilly gasped. The sound echoed strangely, bouncing off the narrow walls. "All right," Agatha said, at last, placing a steadying hand on Tilly's shoulder. "Let's not push our luck for now." Together, they moved back up the corridor. Agatha kept her flashlight sweeping the space behind them, though she wasn't sure what she expected to see. The cold followed them until they stepped through the opening behind the bookcase. Once they emerged into the main library, the temperature lifted immediately, as though an unseen boundary had been crossed. The bookcase swung shut with a soft but final thud. Tilly exhaled shakily. "Agatha, what was that place?" Agatha didn't answer right away. Her mind raced, replaying the half-sentence she had tucked away, the cryptic engravings, and the way the lights dimmed, as if warning them, whatever the ledger was, it had once mattered enough for someone to hide it, and someone else must have been desperate to find it. "We're coming back," she murmured, more to herself than Tilly, "but next time we won't leave empty-handed."
Chapter 4. Rumors Brewing in Carsley. The tea shop buzzed with its usual morning chatter, the kind that ebbed and flowed like gentle waves around the polished wooden tables. Agatha stepped inside, brushing a cool gust of outdoor air from her coat as the familiar warmth wrapped around her. A soft bell chimed overhead, and the scent of baked scones drifted toward her. The room felt cheerfully ordinary, a welcome contrast to the shadows of the library's hidden corridor. Mrs. Boggle sat at her claimed corner table, a knitted shawl draped around her shoulders and a determined squint on her face as though every sip of her tea revealed a new secret. As Agatha passed, Mrs. Boggle leaned forward, lowering her voice with exaggerated importance. "My dear Agatha," she said, tapping her teaspoon against her saucer, "have you heard? Someone's been slinking around the library after closing hours. Frightened poor Mr. Dunwell half to death when he walked past last night." Agatha raised an eyebrow with feigned detachment. "Is that so? Probably just a cat." Mrs. Boggle sniffed loudly. "Cats don't wear heavy boots," and Mr. Dunwell heard the distinct sound of footsteps, not pattering, stomping around, he said. She leaned closer. "Near the back wall, too, the same side where the peculiar shelves are, according to Tilly." Agatha's heart tickled with recognition, but she stirred her tea calmly. "I'm sure the library attracts all sorts of noises." Before Mrs. Boggle could reply, Mr. Comfrey slid into the conversation with his usual theatrical flair. He placed a plate of crumpets on the table as if setting down evidence. "Noises? Oh, it's more than noises," he declared, puffing out his chest. "I saw someone myself, a figure cloaked in shadow, carrying what looked like a bundle, walking straight toward the alley behind the library. Around midnight, I should say." Mrs. Boggle gasped. "A bundle? What kind of bundle?" Mr. Comfrey waved one hand dramatically. "Long, wrapped in something. I couldn't tell if it was cloth or paper, but it was tied with string. The way the figure held it, well, it looked important." Agatha took a measured sip of her tea, letting the warmth settle her thoughts while her mind worked briskly. A bundle carried toward the alley, footprints in the restricted passageway, torn paper mentioning a ledger, a locked metal door someone had tried to access. The pieces shifted toward one another in her head, forming the beginnings of a shape she couldn't yet identify. "What were you doing out so late, Mr. Comfrey?" Agatha asked lightly. He hesitated, then straightened his jacket. "Checking on my tomatoes. The frost, you know." Mrs. Boggle muttered, "His tomatoes haven't grown properly since last April." Agatha hid a smirk behind her teacup. Conversation drifted around her in comfortable murmurs, the clink of spoons, the soft hum of gossip about the upcoming bake sale, the gentle creak of the tea shop's wooden floor. Yet even among cozy familiarity, the thread of mystery wove itself through every word exchanged. Carsley's comfortable charm only sharpened the contrast between her snug surroundings and the secrets brewing quietly behind the library's walls. Mrs. Boggle leaned in again. "What do you think about it all, Agatha? You're awfully calm." Agatha set her cup down, letting her expression soften into mild, uninterested curiosity. "If someone's sneaking about, I imagine the police will sort it out. Probably nothing more than mischief." Mrs. Boggle huffed. Mischief doesn't carry bundles at midnight, and Mr. Comfrey nodded in solemn agreement, and mischief certainly doesn't lurk near restricted shelves. Agatha tried not to stiffen at the unintended accuracy of his remark. Restricted. The word echoed against the memory of the metal door's engraving. If someone was searching for the same hidden ledger hinted at in the torn note, then she wasn't merely stumbling onto a curiosity. She was stepping into a chase. She finished her tea, letting her gaze drift briefly toward the frosted window. Outside, the village bustled in innocent routine, unaware of the secrets threading quietly through its heart. Cozy or not, Carsley was holding its breath, and Agatha felt the gentle thrill of knowing she'd be the one to draw out the truth.
Svernjuller opsturking etter njakken, murf de mrozonoster, dreper met die nekjumimens stad, her verfler bits no stukjes, mimsen sil elis, mrar not na he dat self with the guy, bursts into shooting with my skill, verkar in the boy fiddle, but the guy, stetharbr, nay garsloth, suffer seems a he, get the line, was blood see the beam, said it's no slight no muss, her vaxity shervedo, spot servant in the Brave the car self zealous, road to the net, snurf no foot, should this happen, this kind next to be Louine, that on the list day, and the south and so it. No, I flew naps a simmer by those shivers and yards in on my singing silver in your roll, where so bets that they got, sned as no thing is not out. Serve say wouldn't it? I max a he, get the hand up, service shish. Got hammers and yips as you thought that. So I rung it with books on even or will be. I think you're with our sandal. Here, ballad, but now, and it says the door's nose. But they got tap, this first Zager. It says getting this nester. So I should boom, but it's called it. It even ever resing with fun. Ups in the shiv and ever so with us it. Shanavi should pass in the scasser while the voice seats searched it. So no one. But I'll see list. We'll outside. Why, certainly. Staat er goed vol per roeg, dus necessair with the stoker and alcohol is spashiest and throw market. Heel is niet in de Russian nest as if they got. Her work was die show for all niddy hing it must. Swakrain that serves niet it must not fish the doorish. Snow is nerf. Stone felly schnup. Her own minute did I bescocht her no one. Where they is niet so serving if. We'll severn this fishish. Why is the guy's dreich besidish. Low not your simber off from near air bell the head. Gil mercy over so we list. Don't have to sim stay. Keeps it or get out of it. But on looks nice that we get the guy. Or what I do. The sharps is listening a loop, see not either dream. Snets is blood for elks to live with little sub. Sveil the elk near fang your lornish nest in this nest. Saw with the guy. Well off with no muss in his caps if is that myrtle sure her wing snail. And her wolf that's nest is a haggish. But if did say or an ear with them. So I that's the guy no feel if the wouldn't be see if labor. Looking at must in the brush, lashing on the lamb with what's that fluster, no, I really asked more. But she's the dust like such the seal.
Chapter 5. Following the Quiet Clues. Moonlight spilled across the cobbled village streets, silvering the rooftops and sending long shadows skimming along the walls of Carsley Library. Agatha approached the building with careful, measured steps, the brass key warm in her pocket. The air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of autumn leaves, and every sound, the rustle of the wind, the distant barking of a dog, seemed magnified in the stillness. She paused at the library door, listening. The usual creak of the hinges greeted her, softer than she remembered, as if the building itself had been waiting. Once inside, the familiar warmth of the library's interior seemed muted under the moonlight filtering through tall windows. Dust motes floated lazily in the silver beams, catching the light like tiny stars suspended in the air. Agatha's boots tapped softly against the polished floor, a quiet metronome for the building's subtle, welcoming creaks. She moved with deliberate caution, allowing her senses to adjust, drinking in the hush that felt different now,
charged with the sense of prior presence. Turning toward the back wall, her eyes immediately found the towering bookshelf. It was already slightly ajar, the wood displaced just enough to hint that someone else had been here since morning. Agatha's pulse quickened, not with fear, but with that pleasant thrill of anticipation she knew so well. The brass key rested against her palm, a reassuring weight and a promise of what might be revealed. She smiled faintly, noting the faint scratches along the floorboards that seemed fresher than she had seen before. Pushing gently, she guided the bookshelf open just enough to slip through the narrow gap. The passage beyond greeted her with the familiar scent of old paper and dust, but layered over it was something new, the faint, lingering aroma of candle smoke. Her flashlight traced the walls as she stepped inside, illuminating footprints that crisscrossed the floor. Some were older, pressed into the dust from earlier exploration, but others were fresh, sharper and deeper, cutting new paths that hinted someone else had moved cautiously through the corridor. She crouched to examine them, comparing the impressions carefully. The newer set overlapped the older ones, weaving through the same route toward the locked metal door at the end. Her fingers hovered over the dust without touching it, appreciating the quiet story the footprints told. Whoever had been here was deliberate, careful, but not hurried, someone accustomed to moving unnoticed, and the scent of candle smoke suggested that their presence was very recent, perhaps even today. She straightened, letting the beam of her flashlight sweep across the passage. The walls, lined with forgotten catalogs and littered papers, seemed to lean inward, guiding her attention to the distant steel door. A hush fell over the corridor, broken only by the soft creak of the bookshelf swinging slightly as it settled back into place after her passage. Agatha drew a slow breath, letting the cool air fill her lungs. The quiet thrill of discovery pulsed through her veins, warm and invigorating. With the brass key resting against her coat, Agatha's gaze lingered on the footprints, the subtle scent, the slightly shifted bookshelf. Someone had been here. Someone was tracing the same path she had walked only days before, and the mystery of the restricted archive, once distant and theoretical, now felt immediate, alive in the very dust beneath her feet. She took another step deeper into the passage, allowing anticipation to guide her forward, every sense alert and every shadow a possible clue.
Agatha's flashlight beam danced over the cold metal of the locked door, highlighting the faint engravings she had studied before. Archive B, restricted. She crouched slightly, letting her eyes sweep the floor around the base. That's when a glint caught her attention, a small round object, warm under the light. Leaning closer, she picked up a brass button, its surface embossed with a design she didn't immediately recognize. Tiny scratches marred its edges, as if it had been torn from clothing during a struggle or hurried movement. The button was heavier than it looked, solid brass, and it felt significant in her palm. Her gaze lifted to the metal door. Fresh scratches marred the lock, shallow yet deliberate, suggesting someone had tried, and failed, to pick it recently. The marks were angled strangely, as if the hand behind them had been unsure, testing the mechanism for weaknesses. Agatha pressed her finger against one of the grooves. Whoever had been here had done so carefully, quietly, leaving little evidence beyond what she now held in her hand. The realization made her heart rate quicken, not with panic, but with the keen thrill of discovery. A faint sound drifted through the narrow passage, a soft thud from deeper within the archive. Agatha froze, straining to listen. Dust motes hung in the air, glowing like tiny lanterns under her flashlight, and every creak of the building seemed amplified in the silence. She called out, her voice calm but firm. "Hello? Is someone there?" Only the hollow echo of her words returned. Silence swallowed everything else. She waited a few moments, sensing the stillness pressing against her ears, but nothing moved. Whoever had made the thud had vanished, leaving only the quiet and the lingering scent of candle smoke. Agatha crouched again, examining the scratches more closely. They were recent,
too recent to have been caused by any earlier exploration. She compared their angles to the older impressions from her previous visit. Whoever had been here followed roughly the same path, near the footprints she had already noted, moving methodically toward the door. Someone else was pursuing the same secret she had been drawn to, yet they had left just enough traces for her to follow. Pocketing the brass button, she allowed herself a slow breath, the metallic weight a reassuring reminder that every small detail could unlock the larger mystery. The faint chill of the passage pressed against her, but it no longer felt threatening. Rather, it encouraged vigilance, sharpening her senses. She rose, brushing the dust from her knees, and cast one last look at the scratched lock. The door remained closed, stubborn and unyielding, yet its secret seemed within reach, almost whispering at the edges of her awareness. Reluctantly, she stepped back through the narrow passage toward the bookshelf, carefully swinging it closed behind her. The main library greeted her with its familiar warmth, the hum of quiet village life leaking through the windows. The brass button, tucked safely in her coat pocket, Agatha knew that she now held a tangible clue. Someone had been here, someone determined, and the mystery was growing sharper. Whatever lay behind the locked metal door was no longer a distant puzzle. It was active, alive, and awaiting her next move.
Chapter 6. The Ledger's Shadow. Agatha stepped into Sir Charles Frayth's study, the familiar scent of leather-bound books and polished wood enveloping her instantly. The afternoon sunlight streamed through tall windows, illuminating rows of tomes that seemed to stretch into infinity. Sir Charles, seated behind his desk, looked up from a worn copy of The History of English Villages with a genial smile. Agatha placed her coat on a nearby chair and carefully held out the brass button. "Look at this," she said, turning it in her fingers. "Found it near the locked archive door in the library. I wondered if it might mean something to you." Charles leaned forward, adjusting his spectacles. He examined the button with deliberate care, turning it over to inspect the embossed design. "Ah," he said finally, a note of recognition creeping into his tone. "This is a piece from a vintage coat once worn by council officials. Early 20th century. Remarkably rare. Most of the buttons were replaced decades ago." He traced the embossed pattern with one finger. "This one is definitely authentic." Agatha raised her eyebrow. "Council officials?" Charles nodded. "Yes, the sort that held sway over every minor decision in Carsley for generations. I had almost forgotten these old uniforms existed. Curious that a button should appear in the library of all places." Agatha set the button on the desk, then recounted her recent findings: the locked metal door, the torn note about the ledger, and the footprints leading to the restricted archive. He listened intently, occasionally tapping his lips with a thoughtful finger. "Now that you mention it," Charles said slowly, leaning back in his chair, "I remember Mrs. Penwood. Years ago, she came to me quite distraught. She claimed that someone on the council was involved in corruption. She was convinced there were records, proof of misdeeds hidden somewhere. Of course, no one believed her at the time. People thought she was exaggerating or imagining things." His eyes narrowed as he leaned closer. "A ledger, perhaps, one that could expose wrongdoing?" Agatha felt a shiver of realization. So the ledger mentioned in the torn note, it could actually contain evidence someone wanted hidden? Charles rubbed his chin, deep in thought. "Precisely. If Mrs. Penwood went missing because she found it, then it stands to reason someone else, perhaps a current resident or a relative of the old council, might still be concerned about it, hiding it, retrieving it, keeping it from prying eyes." The thought sent a new pulse of urgency through Agatha. She had assumed curiosity and mystery motivated the whispers, the footprints, and the flickering lights. But now the stakes felt different. What had been an intriguing puzzle suddenly carried tangible weight, evidence, wrongdoing, and perhaps even danger hidden in the quiet recesses of Carsley Library. "Charles," she said finally, meeting his eyes with a decisive glint, "I think we may need your help. The archive is locked, and someone's clearly been trying to access it. If the ledger is real, we're not just dealing with dust and shadows anymore.
We're dealing with history that someone still wants buried. Charles' eyes sparkled, equal parts amusement and determination. Ah, Agatha, you know how I feel about mysteries. Consider me officially intrigued and officially involved. Agatha allowed herself a faint smile, pocketing the brass button. With Charles joining her, the search for the ledger was no longer a solitary pursuit. The quiet library corridors, the hidden passage, and the locked metal door suddenly seemed charged with new significance. They weren't just secrets, they were evidence, waiting for the right pair of eyes and the right touch to uncover them. The soft tick of Charles' antique clock echoed through the study, a quiet reminder that time, like the ledger, moved steadily forward, and someone else might already be racing to claim what had been hidden for so long.
Agatha pulled the scrap of paper from her coat pocket, letting the afternoon sun spill across it. She smoothed the edges carefully, inspecting the torn fragment again under the bright light. The half-sentence about the ledger had always caught her attention, but now she noticed something new. Faint, nearly imperceptible pencil lines running along the margin. At first they seemed random, just stray marks from the pages past, but as she tilted the paper, squinting, a pattern emerged. The lines formed straight segments and right angles, resembling the rough outline of a floor plan. Charles leaned over, adjusting his spectacles. "Interesting," he murmured. "It looks like someone sketched part of a building, probably in haste, given the fragmentary nature. I'd wager it's the lower archive you've been exploring." He traced the lines lightly with his finger, careful not to smudge the pencil. "See here? That corner could represent the bookshelf entrance, and this longer rectangle, I suspect that's the metal door leading to another room beyond." Agatha's pulse quickened. A second chamber. The possibility that the restricted archive held more than a single sealed room added weight to everything she had uncovered. Fresh footprints, candle smoke, a brass button left behind. It all suddenly made sense. Someone had been moving carefully through multiple layers of secrecy, and the ledger was likely their target. She laid the fragment flat on the table, imagining the rest of the floor plan in her mind. Each pencil line hinted at a hidden structure, corridors branching beyond what anyone in the library would normally access. The metal bore wasn't just an obstacle, it was a gateway to something deeper, a room that had been intentionally concealed and protected for decades. She could almost feel the musty air and the weight of forgotten documents pressing behind it. Charles leaned back in his chair, eyes thoughtful. "If your intruder, or anyone who knew the ledger's importance, has been here before you, they'll have an advantage. You'll need a plan to gain access, preferably before they return." Agatha nodded slowly, her mind assembling strategies and contingencies. The brass key had opened the passageway, but the metal door required something more. Perhaps another key, perhaps another method entirely. Whoever tried to pick the lock had left fresh scratches, so the challenge was active. Every clue pointed towards urgency. A map hidden in the margins, a missing ledger, and a rival moving unseen. "I see now," she murmured, tucking the paper carefully back into her pocket, her mind already spinning through possibilities for entry, planning the next move with methodical focus. Whoever was moving in the shadows might have started first, but she intended to finish the race.
Chapter 7. The Chamber Beyond the Door. Agatha and Charles approached the library under the quiet cover of evening, the air crisp and scented faintly with wood smoke drifting from nearby cottages. The brass key rested in Agatha's hand, though she didn't expect it would be needed for the metal door this time. Charles carried a small toolkit, its weight solid and reassuring. The library loomed before them, dark and still, yet welcoming in the way only familiar places could be. Agatha's heartbeat thrummed with anticipation, a mix of excitement and the unshakable edge of unease. As they neared the back wall, Agatha's eyes immediately caught the metal door. It was ajar, pushed just enough to reveal the darkness within. Her pulse quickened. Someone had been here ahead of them. Whoever it was, they'd moved through the passage and into the chamber before she and Charles had the chance to arrive. She exchanged a brief glance with him. "We're not alone," she murmured. Charles nodded, lips pressed together in silent agreement. They stepped carefully into the chamber, the floorboards groaning softly beneath their weight. The air smelled faintly of dust and something richer, warmer, perhaps wax from old candles. Agatha's flashlight cut across the room, revealing low shelves lined with middle boxes, leather-bound books whose spines had faded into muted brown, and a small table that held several stubby remnants of burned-down candles. Dust swirled lazily in the beam, disturbed in irregular patterns, evidence of recent activity. Her attention was immediately drawn to one of the metal boxes. Its lid was ajar, hinges bent slightly, and the interior lay empty. Her breath hitched. A ledger, perhaps the very one hinted at in the torn note, might have been kept here, carefully concealed. And now it was gone. The empty box seemed to mock her, a silent confirmation that the archive's secrets were no longer wholly secure. Charles ran a finger along the edges of the shelves, noting the scuff marks on the floor where the boxes had been moved. "Someone has been thorough," he said quietly, voice steady but low. They knew exactly where to look. Agatha kneeled by the open box, brushing away a layer of fine dust, her mind racing through possibilities. Footprints, candle remnants, the brass button, all led to this moment. Whoever had been here had a purpose, and that purpose might not align with the safety of Carsley's quiet streets. Agatha's eyes drifted to the small table at the center of the chamber. The candle stubs suggested that someone had been working here recently, not simply passing through. The melted wax had dripped onto the wood and hardened, evidence of deliberate, patient action. A faint smell of smoke lingered, mingling with the mustiness of old paper. Every detail hinted at secrecy, planning, and perhaps urgency. Her chest tightened as the implications sank in. The ledger, proof of corruption or hidden truths, had likely been taken, or at the very least moved. Agatha's usual calm resolve hardened into determined focus. She glanced at Charles, who met her gaze with a steady, encouraging nod. Together, they stepped further into the chamber, careful not to disturb any more evidence than necessary. Dust floated around them in small motes, catching the faint light and lending the room an almost ethereal atmosphere. Agatha exhaled slowly, forcing herself to steady her thoughts. The missing ledger raised more questions than it answered. Who had taken it? Were they still nearby? And what had driven them to act so decisively in the dead of night? Each moment in the silent chamber heightened the sense of urgency. The cozy library, with all its charm and warmth, now felt like the stage for a quiet but escalating confrontation. The trail of clues was clear, and Agatha knew the chase had only just begun.
Agatha knelt beside the small table in the chamber, her eyes catching on a single torn page lying amidst candle wax and dust. The edges were jagged, and the handwriting, though faded, remained legible, neat, precise, and undeniably official. She recognized the familiar ledger style immediately. Scanning the lines, she noticed several village names listed alongside brief annotations in the margins. One in particular stood out, a nearby village recently embroiled in local council disputes. Agatha's brow furrowed as she considered the implications. Whoever had compiled this record had been meticulous, and the information it contained could ignite quiet tensions into outright scandal. The soft flicker of candlelight reflected off the page, casting shadows that seemed to stretch along the table and across the room. Agatha studied the names, tracing her finger along the annotations, imagining the ledger once complete, all its secrets bound together. The careful documentation suggested someone intent on holding power accountable, or perhaps protecting it. She couldn't help but wonder who among the villagers would go to such lengths, and who might still be following the trail. A sudden creak echoed through the chamber, startling her. She swung around just as Tilly stepped cautiously inside, eyes wide, hands trembling. The librarian's face was pale, her posture rigid with unease. Agatha rose to meet her, folding her arms in a protective gesture. "Tilly, what is it?" she asked softly, keeping her voice calm to steady the other woman. Tilly took a shaky step forward, glancing nervously at the torn page. I didn't want to come, but I've been receiving notes, anonymous notes, warnings. They say
They say I should leave the past buried. Her eyes darted around the chamber as if expecting someone to appear from the shadows. The fear radiating from her was palpable, and Agatha felt a surge of protective urgency tighten in her chest. The two women exchanged a tense glance, the candlelight casting moving patterns across the room. Agatha realized the danger wasn't abstract. It was close, personal, and intertwined with the village itself. Someone had gone to great lengths to keep the ledger hidden, and now the warnings had escalated, reaching Tilly directly. This wasn't simply about curiosity or historical records. It was about power, secrets, and people willing to manipulate events to preserve them. Agatha tucked the torn page into her coat pocket, careful not to disturb any remaining evidence. "Tilly," she said firmly, placing a steadying hand on the librarian's shoulder, "we'll handle this. No one threatens you without us noticing, but we need to be smart. The ledger, these notes, they're pieces of the same puzzle, and someone in the village clearly wants to control what becomes of it." Tilly exhaled shakily, nodding, her shoulders still tense but slightly relieved by Agatha's calm presence. The weight of the torn page and the anonymous warnings pressed on Agatha's mind, sharpening her focus. Whomever had sent those notes was watching, and whoever had taken the ledger might strike again. But for now, Agatha understood that the next steps were critical, strategic moves in a quiet, simmering game that could reveal long-buried truths and expose the hidden players orchestrating them.
Chapter 8. The Secret Kept Behind the Bookshelf. Agatha and Charles entered the library's reading room, the familiar quiet wrapping around them like a soft blanket. Afternoon light filtered through the tall windows, casting a warm glow on the polished tables and neatly stacked books. Agatha's mind raced, piecing together the brass button, the footprints, the torn page, and the flickering lights. One thought crystallized suddenly, as if the pieces had snapped into place. The button belonged to someone she had seen countless times in the village, Mr. Comfrey, the gentle, soft-spoken man who always fussed over the tea shop's deliveries and wandered the library with careful attentiveness. They found him seated near a table, cataloging some old documents, oblivious to their entrance at first. "Mr. Comfrey," Agatha began, her voice calm but firm, "we need to talk about the restricted archive, the ledger, and the footprints leading there." His head lifted slowly, eyes widening in immediate recognition. There was a pause heavy with understanding. Then he exhaled quietly. "I suppose there's no point denying it," he said softly, standing. His hands trembled slightly, but there was no malice in his posture, only apprehension. "Yes, I went into the archive, but I meant no harm. I never intended to frighten anyone." Agatha gestured toward the brass button she had kept in her palm. "This was left near the metal door. It belongs to your coat, doesn't it?" He nodded, a faint smile tinged with sorrow. "It does. My sister's coat, actually. She passed years ago. When Mrs. Penwood discovered the ledger, she accused several council members of misconduct. My sister, she was implicated unfairly. She had nothing to do with it, yet the whispers and judgment nearly ruined her." He paused, voice catching slightly. "I found the ledger after Mrs. Penwood vanished. I hid it, to protect her memory, to protect the family. I didn't want anyone else harmed by accusations or misunderstandings." Charles leaned against a nearby shelf, absorbing the confession. "So, all the footprints, the whispers, the disturbances, were efforts to safeguard the ledger, not steal it." Mr. Comfrey nodded solemnly. "Yes, I only tried to retrieve it before anyone else uncovered the scandal. I was clumsy, perhaps even reckless, but my only intention was to prevent further pain." His gaze shifted toward Agatha, tinged with pleading. "You must understand, I wasn't trying to frighten Tilly or anyone, just protect the truth." Agatha felt a wave of understanding wash over her, a mixture of relief and empathy. The mystery had seemed menacing, full of unseen threats, yet the source was a human fear, rooted in loyalty and love. The ledger, the locked boxes, even the anonymous notes warning Tilly all fell into a new context. The quiet disturbances, the late-night entries, and the careful traces were not acts of malice, but acts of protection. She exhaled, allowing the tension in her shoulders to ease. "Mr. Comfrey, the ledger's history may be complicated, but your intentions were not cruel. You acted out of care, and that is understood." He let out a long, shaky breath, relief softening his expression. "Thank you, Agatha. You've made a frightened man feel understood." For the first time since the archive's secrets began resurfacing, the library seemed to exhale with them. The scattered papers, the dust, the faint smell of candle smoke, all the echoes of secrecy settled into place. Agatha realized that sometimes the deepest mysteries were not sinister, but simply human. Fears, protection, and the desire to shield those we love, even in the quietest corners of a sleepy village.
The morning sun filtered gently through the windows of Carsey Library, casting a soft glow across the polished floors and rows of books. Agatha, Charles, and Mr. Comfrey gathered near the back, where the hidden passage and the once restricted archive now stood open, a testament to secrets finally brought to light. Agatha had persuaded Mr. Comfrey to return the ledger, to place it where its contents could be preserved without fear or concealment. His shoulders were tense at first, but relief began to settle into his expression as the reality of resolution dawned. The village council assembled shortly thereafter, their faces a mixture of embarrassment and cautious curiosity. Agatha observed the proceedings quietly, noting how Mrs. Penwood's truth, long buried and doubted, was finally recognized. The council agreed to formally preserve the archives, cataloging documents, ledgers, and notes with care, ensuring that the history, complete and unaltered, would be available for future generations. The acknowledgement of past mistakes brought a quiet dignity to the room, and even those initially skeptical of Mrs. Penwood's warnings seemed moved by the courage embedded in her discoveries. Tilly, who had feared for her own safety and felt the weight of long-held secrets, regained her confidence. She moved through the library with a newfound steadiness, dusting shelves and arranging catalogs with a calm efficiency that reflected her relief. Whispers that had haunted the corridors for weeks, the subtle creaks, the faint echo of unknown footsteps, gradually faded. The library returned to its ordinary rhythm, quiet, comforting, and filled with the soft rustle of pages and the occasional murmur of visitors. Agatha lingered for a moment near the now unlocked metal door, reflecting on the events that had unfolded. A ledger once hidden, footprints that led to discovery, and the brass button that had triggered the unraveling of decades-old secrets, all pieces of a puzzle that revealed the complex intertwining of fear, protection, and human intent. Carsey had been shaped quietly by these hidden histories, the village's heart carrying stories that lingered just beneath the surface, waiting for the right eyes to uncover them. By mid-afternoon, Agatha and Charles made their way home, the air crisp and inviting. They settled in her cozy cottage with a kettle steaming and cups of tea warming their hands. Agatha sipped slowly, letting the comfort of the familiar surroundings envelop her. Charles smiled, leaning back in his chair, while Agatha's gaze drifted toward the window, where the village basked in gentle sunlight. The quiet streets, the gardens, the soft rustle of trees, it all seemed untouched, yet richer, layered with stories now acknowledged and preserved. "Carsey will always hold its secrets," she murmured, more to herself than to Charles, "and some of them are better left quietly waiting for those patient enough to find them." Charles chuckled softly. "And for the rest of us, it's enough to enjoy the discovery when it happens." Agatha nodded, a warm smile spreading across her face. The mystery behind the bookshelf had been resolved, the ledger returned, and the village restored to its gentle rhythm. Yet, even in this peaceful moment, she sensed that the library, the quiet passages, and the soft shadows of Carsey still held stories, hidden, waiting, whispering ever so softly to those curious enough to listen. She raised her cup in a small toast to the past, to truth, and to the quiet promise of mysteries yet to unfold.